We had such a great time backstage. We had like a pre-panel panel where we had so much fun together. So we're going to bring out Gabriel Benn. You can call him Asheru, Congressman Joaquin Castro, Jobrani, and Alicia Menendez. Welcome out. Maz, thank you for doing this. Congressman, it's an honor to host you. Good to see you. Alicia, thank you. Alicia made the, you can right here. Alicia came from Miami just for this event, and she won our contest backstage. We were wondering who was the youngest panelist. Alicia Menendez, a fusion of you by a notable degree. So you're going to start, you're going to tell us A, what's a millennial, and B, what is Theo? He's 10. What's a name for him?
They have a name for you. I'll tell you all about it. Thank you for inviting me to something where I got to be the youngest person, because I have a staff that was born in 1992, so you've made me feel really special. Millennials, different definitions. The one I use is 1982 to 2003. There are people who will say it's 1990 to 2000. It's the largest, most diverse generation in American history, most diverse as it relates to race and ethnicity, but also other factors like countries of origin. I think what's important to remember is that sometimes when we talk about generations, we act like we're just talking about young people, when in reality there are structural factors that shape and affect generations. So for the millennial generation, that's a few things. We were born with the child safety laws of the 1980s.
She's rubbing it in.
Yeah, just keeping it real. I have never ridden a bicycle without a helmet. I have never been in a car without my seatbelt on. It turns out that that might make a generation a little risk averse. We also came of age in the millennium. That's how we got our name. And that means things like September 11th, 2001 was an incredibly important turning point in our understanding of the country we live in and its place in the world. So for example, that changes the way we look at unilateral interactions.
Backstage, you were telling us about pluralists. What's
pluralists, that's you. That's the next generation, and they will have grown up in an America so diverse that they will have a fundamentally different understanding of diversity, where we talk about diversity as a concept and they want to know why we're talking about it.
Congressman Castro, you're co-president of your freshman class. What's the difference between younger members and older members, which like to be called leaders, but we'll just call them older members here?
Well, I think you have a lot of the younger members, obviously, that come in very eager, very anxious to work. We came in a spirit, we're sophomores yet now, the class that I was in, but came in with a spirit of wanting to work with the other side. You know, we didn't succeed very well. Honestly, last Congress was the second least productive Congress in American history, but there was certainly a spirit, a passion and an energy to accomplish big things and to do good things for the country. And I think, you know, the more senior members are looked up to as mentors, as leaders, and they've been very helpful.
Jobrani, you're going to be here for a couple days. You have a show Friday tomorrow at the Warner Theater. Tell us about the difference between communicating to a younger audience and an audience of fellow parents.
That's great. First of all, my definition of millennials are people that make me feel old. Yeah, it's always interesting because you're talking to someone and you think that, you know, you're not looking in the mirror when you're talking to them. So you go, oh, I'm about your age, and then you go, when were you born? And they say, like you said, 92, and I go, oh, I graduated college in 93. That's a bummer. So as a stand-up comedian, when you're performing for people that are younger, it's actually very interesting because I have kids now. So besides the political stuff that I talk about on stage, I also do material about kids. And it's always interesting to me when I'm doing material about kids and I look at some of the audience members who are in their mid to late 20s, they might not even be married, and they're just staring at me like, what are you talking about, dude? And then because a lot of times when I do kid material, I go, oh, who's got kids here? And then when somebody claps, I get into how exhausting these kids are and all that stuff. So whenever I perform in front of millennials, I think I have to say, like, okay, who's got younger brothers and sisters? You remember when they wouldn't sleep? You know, so you kind of gotta change your material a little bit. But the encouraging thing is that I do think that in the age of information, that you can still talk about a lot of topics, even if they're political, and the millennials are on board.
Gabriel, you have 2 hats, 2 names. You commute between DC and Chicago, where you just came from. You're in Chicago about 4 days a week. Tell us about your 2 names and your 2 hats.
My 2 names, 2 hats. My name is Gabriel Benn. My given name is Gabriel. My performance name is Asheru. I am a hip hop educator, so I've been a school teacher, administrator, curriculum developer for 18 years, and I've also been a hip hop artist for 18 years. So I've been kind of wearing those 2 hats, and I've been able to carve a lane for myself where I can bring the 2 together.
The Post Style section did a profile of you, and they said that you were, by day you were Gabriel, by night you're Asheru. Will you buy that?
Right. Yes, yeah, I am totally. I mean, I remember my first years of teaching, I would like have shows at the 9:30 club, and you know, I'd be out until 3 in the morning, and I'd come into school at 7 the next morning, and I'd tell my kids, I just had a show with Ludacris last night. They're like, no, you didn't. I'm like, no, I swear I did. And you know, and so I used to have fun with that, you know, in the earlier part. And then once the Boondocks stuff picked up and people started recognizing me for that, now when I go into schools and I interact with students, that's kind of like my calling card. I come in and I say, hey, how many of you familiar with the Boondocks? And then they all, you know, they say, oh, I watched that show. I'm like, well, I'm the guy that does the theme song on the show. And they're like, no, you're not that dude. And you know, in this age of technology and information, all I say is, well, pull it out, look it up, Google it. And then they pull their phones out, they look it up and they go,
that's him?
Oh yeah, that is you. Okay, cool. You know, so I use that now kind of as my calling card, but once I hook them, then I can go in and do that.
Now, you're consulting now to the Chicago schools, but for several years you were here in DC at Ballou High School.
Yeah.
What's the key to communicating with a high school student versus one of us?
You know, when you're dealing and engaging with adults, you know, you have to have pleasantries, and you say things you may not really mean, but you imply them. And it's, you know, there's an art of conversation when you're speaking with adults. With high school students, they have the BS detector, so you just kind of have to go right in and say what you have to say and make it plain, you know. And I respect that about high school students.
You're nodding.
Well, no, it's one of, and it's not just because they're young, it's because they're millennials. Like they have this really high BS detector because they've grown up by virtue of social media and the internet in a much more transparent world where they do have access to information that other people simply did not have. And so if you are not authentic, we can tell immediately.
Speaking of BS, Congressman Castro, well, I guess that's not very good transition, but...
You asked the politician about the BS.
That's cold, Mike, that's cold.
But Mike, I wanted to follow up on one thing that Alicia said, is I do think that this generation of millennials and younger persons are growing up in a very transformative media age. If you think about it, people that are using Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, a lot of these social media platforms, it's mostly a conversation that the younger generations are having among themselves. And I think that that's actually a hope in American politics, is that will, and it has to some extent already, but as it continues to mature, that will be a platform where younger people will get more and more engaged in politics and in policy. Because, for example, my dad is 74. He doesn't have a Twitter account. He doesn't have a Facebook account. It's a generational thing, and it's a much younger generation having almost like a private conversation, I think.
But he does Snapchat, so. Now, Maz, when Howard Schultz, the founder and CEO of Starbucks, went out to have conversations about race in America, rather than doing it under the Starbucks banner, he did it as himself, personally. And it reminded me of something the Obama campaign did. One of their precepts was that you're a lot better off talking to voters through their own social networks, having my friends talk to me, as opposed to having the campaign talk to them. When you're on stage, how do you bridge that gap? How do you find that you can connect despite being the guy on stage?
Well, you know, for me, as a comedian, I'm also of Middle Eastern descent. I was born in Iran, grew up in America. And one of the first things that, I wrote a book about it.
No, you're not a terrorist.
I'm not a terrorist. but I've played one on TV, and that's the title of the book.
But
no,
you play an amicable terrorist. What does that mean?
Yeah, well, the book tells a story of how when you first start out in Hollywood, when I first started out 17 years ago, the types of parts that you get, you know, when they find out you're Middle Eastern, they go, oh, you're Middle Eastern, great. Can you say, I will kill you in the name of Allah? And you go, I could, but what if I played the doctor in this? They go, great, and then you can hijack the hospital. So those are the roles you get. So early on I played a terrorist in a Chuck Norris movie. I felt bad doing it. I said no more. And then 24 came calling. They said, we got a terrorist part. I said no. And they go, but he changes his mind halfway through the mission. I was like, ooh, the ambivalent terrorist. I go, that's interesting. So that was the last time I did one of those parts. But back to your question about doing stand-up, you know, when I'm on stage, I've been lucky to have a diverse crowd. And I've had a chance to perform all over the world. I've done stand-up in the Middle East. I've done stand-up in Scandinavia. And the beauty of it is, I think as a comedian, and I think maybe this is part of talking to high school kids as well, if you don't take yourself as seriously, if you're able to be self-deprecating a little bit, have fun, loosen up, and go, look, I know you guys know the language. You know what I'm saying? I mean, a lot of times with comedy, they go, well, is it clean? I go, yeah, my show's relatively clean, but let me tell you something. These kids, the things that they've heard, I was reciting Eddie Murphy at the age of 10, you know, so it's like, and I'm not advocating for dirty comedy. I'm just saying the topics you can talk about, your younger audiences will get, as well as your diverse audience. So what I try to do is I try to be self-deprecating at first, and then when I go to the audience, I go, who else is here tonight? And there's, you know, and there's Indians and Pakistanis and Mexicans, and we get into it. We have some fun with everybody. And I think because I laughed at myself first, they're on board for the rest of the trip.
So since we're by day, I guess we'll call you Gabriel, and something that you both have done and have taught people about is mentoring. Now, for us oldsters in the audience and in live stream land, what's a tip for us, or what's a technique for us that would help us be better mentors to bridge that gap the way Maz does with his routine?
I think what Maz said is very important. You have to allow yourself to be vulnerable, allow yourself to, you know, I know for teachers, I always tell teachers, this is not Dangerous Minds, and you are not Michelle Pfeiffer. It's not going to work like that. So you have to go in and you have to be honest. If there's something you don't know, say, look, I don't know. Let's look it up together. But be collaborative, be honest, use your personality, use the stuff that makes you you, but at the same time, just be respectful and collaborative in your engagement. And I know, you know, I've traveled as well. I've traveled to several countries and performed and done workshops. And the last one I just actually in November did one with the State Department. I did a hip-hop diplomacy tour in Bangladesh. So in Bangladesh, you know, hip-hop, they just started listening to hip-hop maybe 5 or 6 years ago. And their engagement to hip-hop was through YouTube, and all they watched were Bone Thugs and Harmony videos and breakdance videos, and that's how they learned our culture, you know. So when I got there, I didn't go in and go, man, turn that off. I'm gonna break the whole thing. I didn't do any of that. I went in, I listened, we talked. They told me their story, and I thought it was very important for them to take their stories and speak in their own language, and to put it back out in another way. And I wasn't like the master sensei. I was more like a facilitator.
All right, well, let's role play. Let's see how good you are. Alicia, you're a senior at Ballou High School. You're meeting for the first time. Gabriel, what do you say?
Good morning.
Good morning.
How are you?
All right.
All right, are we ready to be productive today?
No.
Why not?
Because I'm bored.
Bored? What time did you get here today?
How serious do you want to take
No, you're good. You're good.
I would just keep going. I would keep going until I
Okay,
found
say she wants to be really difficult. What do you do to sort of like connect with her or break through?
I ask, what's going on? Did you eat breakfast this morning?
Yeah.
You want a granola bar? All right, let's go talk.
Yeah, no, that's good.
Find a way. Find something that, because a lot of times kids are cranky in the morning because they don't eat breakfast. I mean, honestly, when I was at Ballou, this is a true story. When I was at Ballou, I used to go to Costco and I'd buy those big green Quaker, whatever, those green granola bar boxes, I forget what it's called, Nature Valley or whatever. And it's like a box of 80. I'd get 2 boxes, and I'd get fruit snacks and like a bag of tangerines or something, and I'd bring it, not every week, but maybe like every 2 or 3 weeks, I'd come in and I'd leave them in my office. And sometimes I'd hear commotion in the hallways, I'd hear kids screaming and stuff going on. And mind you, I was working in a school with emotionally disturbed students, so that was to be expected. You hear somebody screaming or something happens. But then when I go and investigate, not every time, but maybe 60% of the time, it was food related. It was a food related issue that they just, you know, and it's a temporary fix, but it allows you to regroup, to redirect them and get them back in the game. Now, they may come back 2 hours later with another problem, but you at least engage. And what I've learned is from doing that, students build trust. They learn to come to you when they have an issue, and I earned a lot of credibility with my students by doing that.
Because in addition to being hungry, there are a number of things that we're learning about millennials in the workplace, things that really sort of annoy older generations. We want a lot of feedback. We want to work in teams. We want the process to be iterative, so very often we won't come to you with what you might consider a finished draft, but rather something that is partway done because we want to talk our way through it. And if you can look at that as a positive and harness the power of that, which is to say that they will get it done faster in a team, they will get it done better in a team, do not resist the urge to put them in a team because you will get a better product. And the fact that this generation wants feedback because we got so much feedback in school, so much feedback from our parents, again, that's a good thing. We are asking you to mold and to mentor us, and if you see that as an opportunity and not as an annoyance, then it can really benefit the company or institution that you work for.
Congressman Castro, a very specific type of mentoring that you've been involved in is college advisors, pushing for more of those.
Right. Yeah, you know, when I came to Congress, I only stayed on one board that I had been involved with before, and it's called the National College Advising Board, or National College Advising Corps. And if you think about what Teach for America does in placing recent college graduates into high schools to teach, this organization does the same thing, except it places recent college graduates into high schools just to do college advising, because our college advising system through our counselors is basically an anachronism. For example, in California, a few years ago, the ratio of counselors to students was 1 counselor for every 900 students. So one of the things that I've worked on throughout my career, really in politics, has been to improve that system, get more people to college, and then also get them to graduate.
Maz Jobrani, you have a very clever Twitter handle, @Maz Jobrani.
Yes.
What have you found about using social media platforms to communicate with a younger audience than is going to pay $24 for this Simon & Schuster book at...
Reduced to 18 on Amazon. Yes. Today only. No, I'm kidding. But it is 18. You know, it's amazing when, as a comedian, as a performer, I feel like there's such a pressure nowadays to be on every social medium or social media outlet that's out there. And as soon as you get going, a new one comes up. And
how are you on Instagram?
That's the thing. It's like, listen, first of all, I remember MySpace. Remember MySpace?
You remember Friendster?
Friendster. I mean, that wasn't that long ago, but it came and it went. And it's funny because a lot of times as a comedian, I was joking about it. I was like, you feel the pressure, and people go, "Did you hear? Like Kevin Hart's got 10 million people on Twitter." You're like, "Well, I better get on Twitter." And then as soon as you're on Twitter, they're like, "Instagram, it's just a picture." You're like, "Oh my God." And I'm like, "What's next?" Someone's going to be like, "Are you on Foot?" You're like, "What's that?" You're like, "You tap dance your message out." You're like, "Whoa." You know, there's no Foot, by the way. That's just my silly idea.
Wait, what about Meerkat? Does anyone in this room know Meerkat? So you're already behind.
I'm behind. I mean, Vine, 6-second videos.
So Meerkat is cool. Meerkat is a new app, MEERKAT, and it's a little dangerous. It live streams. So you open this app, and when you click it, it tells your Twitter following that you're there, and it doesn't matter if you're here or in a cab, and it will live stream it.
So you just live stream your life?
Yes.
It's your own reality show.
Right.
That's how crazy it is. I mean, like, but that's what my point is, and it's actually, but once you get into it, you realize there's actual ways to communicate. But Vine was a good one where people were like making 6-second videos. I'm like,
don't talk about it in past tense.
No, well, they're still doing it. But what I'm saying is, like, it used to be to make a video, you had to say, lights, camera, action. That's 3 seconds. You got 3 seconds to go, and that one of those is cut. Now you got 2 seconds. You know what I'm saying? But it's like, it's crazy, but people get creative within it. Or Twitter, I was like, 10 years ago when Twitter didn't exist, did you feel the need to get out a message in 140 characters or less? You did not.
No.
And I used to, when Twitter first came out, I was like, who cares what I'm doing? Like people, you know, oh, I'm shopping today, and da-da-da-da. But then you realize, wait a minute, there's revolutions that have actually been helped by Twitter. Or as a performer, sometimes it does, like you said, dealing with millennials or even others that decide to get on Twitter, you realize, oh, wow, there is a way to communicate. There's ways to get messages across. There's fun things that you can get across in a short message. So I personally am happy that I'm still of the age where I can communicate with people on there, and I think we all should be. And again, it's amazing how fast the technology goes, but you got to keep up with it, man.
Alicia Menendez, your show is Alicia Menendez Tonight, also very cleverly named on Fusion. It's on at 7 p.m. Eastern. Although it's not live, it's taped. Shh.
But if she gets on, what was it called? Cat? What was it?
Meerkat.
Meerkat, you can
Boom.
do it live.
So I'm going to show you one of your recent tweets and tell us the story behind it.
Yeah, worrying about stuff is a sign of genius equals worrying about stuff is a sign of intelligence equals I am a genius. There was a study that said worrying about stuff means that you're really, really smart because your brain is super stimulated. And I worry about stuff all the time, like a little piglet, so I'm a genius.
And on your Twitter bio, you call yourself a maximizer. What does that mean?
Maximizers and satisficers is like one of the greatest things I've ever learned. There are two different types of people in the world, maximizers and satisficers. Maximizers, you're on a road trip, you see McDonald's, you're like, I don't know, maybe there's a Burger King down the road. You keep going, then you see Burger King, and you're like, I don't know, maybe there's gonna be a KFC, and you keep going, because you can always imagine that there's a better option in the future.
I am not riding across the country with you.
A satisficer sees McDonald's and they're like, good enough. You know, that it's sort of like your approach to life is whether or not something is, you want more, or whatever you have.
Does that go with like who you get married to as well?
I just got married, and yes, it
Maximizer
does.
or
yes.
satisfizer?
And he did, what
good
was
enough.
he?
What were you?
Maximizer.
Oh, good for you. All right,
Obviously.
good.
But you know, when you talk about this, that's sort of in as much as, you know, you can say you split people into two different types of people. It's also like a generational trait, which is that this is a ridiculously optimistic generation, both about our own futures and about our shared collective future, which makes no sense because if you graduated 2007, 2008, you entered one of the worst job markets in American history. You were saddled with insane student loan debt, and you have a Congress that's being called one of the least effective Congress in history. Like, there's not necessarily, on the surface, a lot to be optimistic about.
Like he nods.
And yet, we both believe that our futures are going to be better and that America's future is going to be better, which is sort of crazy.
Now, Congressman Castro, when your generation is running Congress, will it be different? Would it be different?
I hope so. I mean, I think in a lot of ways you can only go up, right? And so I'm actually 40 this year, or actually last year. I'll be 41 this year. So I'm Generation X. But I think, you know, there's going to be a lot of big challenges for Generation X and below. What we do with entitlements, for example. I'm somebody that's always believed that when we have these very heated conversations about entitlements, for example, we should start the conversation with the younger generations who are still in the workforce versus, you know, my mom's generation, which is the baby boomers, most of them coming to the end of their careers, you know. Like,
I'm glad you finished that out.
Yeah, the end of their careers.
Don't take that personally, anybody.
My mom retired last year.
Oh, okay.
You know, so there's going to be big challenges. I think that these generations are going to have to decide whether they're going to have the same kind of retirement, for example, that the World War II generation had, that my mom's generation had, with Social Security, with Medicare. And for the younger generations, whether you're still going to be able to get a grant that covers most of your college tuition or scholarship. You know, so there's some tough choices to make, and I think that these generations are going to have to wrestle with them in a way that this Congress is punting on a lot of these big issues and not dealing with them.
Now, Congressman, for a lot of people, reaching millennials is a luxury. For you, it is a Darwinian necessity. How do you reach millennial voters?
Well, we're on Instagram, we're on Twitter, we're on Facebook. I haven't gotten into Vine, haven't posted the 6-second videos or anything, but I'm fairly active on social media. I do on most of those platforms at least probably half of my stuff, my tweets. My staff does a bunch of stuff also. And I represent.
You don't do all your tweets?
I don't do all of them, no. The staff does some of them, but I do a lot of them. But also, I mean, you see, Mike, that this president, for example, and politicians living now are in a society where, with regard to politics or really anything, nobody has been able to communicate and distribute their opinion as readily today, or basically before today as they are today. People can communicate what they believe and communicate it to a lot of people in a way that never existed before. And so what I've noticed is for people in politics, that has presented special challenges, because when somebody disagrees with your opinion, for example, there's really, if you're on social media, there's no way to escape what they think about you, right? So literally every day, people are sending complimentary comments to you, and people are also sending sometimes very ugly or very nasty comments. So I think that is good because it gives people a voice and an opinion, but it also creates a kind of Coliseum effect where you have elected officials walking around kind of feeling guarded or guarded in their outlook towards their constituents. It's an interesting phenomenon. It's just fascinating.
Twitter also makes you, whatever you say on it, that's your word. Those are your words. You can't say, I never said it's right here, it's here forever.
Well, if you're a congressman, you can.
I mean,
half of them are his staff.
No, because
that's
actually,
the thing about it, though. When we do, we do a social media training class for teens, and we tell them this is your digital footprint. So be careful. What you say now at 15, when you're 25, and granted, you're 15, I get it, but just be careful what you're saying, because that's the downside to Twitter and things like
let's
that.
go back to our role playing. All right, your social media training, Alicia,
Right.
this senior in high school, she gets that it's her words, but more specifically, what are you going to warn her about?
I would warn you to be careful. You may be on a panel one day, and someone will give you a printout of your tweet, and they'll ask you, what did you mean by this? And you have to have an answer, Alicia. Do you understand?
I actually had that exact thought as I saw this tweet. I was like, this is on paper?
I mean, yeah.
And, and when you tell them that, how do they push back? Or what do they want to do that you beg them, urge them not to do?
They don't push back. I mean, well, yeah, they push back, but it's
You're a little intimidating. I can see.
No. They push back, surely. But the thing is, they understand. They understand, listen, this is here because they read other people's tweets. They see other people's stuff. They have friends. I've seen cases where students have, for example, videotaped a fight, right?
Now you can live stream that
Student gets hurt in a fight. These phones are the devil, I'm telling you. But a student gets hurt in a fight. The videotape winds up on YouTube or it gets passed around in the student network. The police get a hold of it. They want to know who the people were in the fight, but then they also want to know who was videotaping it, who held the camera, because that person's now in trouble. And so I'm just trying to explain to them that there's so many other ramifications other than you just capturing a cool video and putting it online. There's a responsibility that comes with it, and it's hard to kind of really try to cram that into the mind of a teenager, and I get it, but I do just I just throw it out there, and you do what you want with it. That's kind of my approach.
And has what you're talking about, did something like that happen?
Yeah, oh yeah, absolutely.
There's also, I think, a fine line in, as a creator, as somebody who's writing stuff, coming up with stuff, I also think that what Twitter does sometimes, it makes you second guess yourself, like you were saying with the negative comments. And I feel you can't create by committee. So I can't sit there and let all the negative comments affect what I'm going to say. And I remember, like, when YouTube first came out, I remember one of my clips ended up on YouTube, and I was reading the comments, and the first comment was, I love this guy, and I was like, that's great. And the second one was like, this guy rocks. I was like, that's awesome. Then the third guy was like, this guy sucks. And I'm like, what the hell? And then And then the first guy came back to the third guy. He's like, I'm going to find you and kick your ass. I was like, what's going on? And it was this crazy world. And I thought, oh, man, not everybody loves me. And then, and
That's
you know,
what I deal with every day.
Yeah, I'm sure, yeah. Welcome to Congress. No, but you know, one of the light bulb moments for me was a very simple moment. I was watching Letterman, and he goes, yeah, you know, they just put free Wi-Fi in Central Park, which is great, because at lunchtime I can take my laptop to the park and read all my hate mail. Yeah. And I was like, oh my God, this guy must get so much hate mail. And I realized when we're nowadays, everyone you're gonna get hit up. And what you were saying, you gotta be careful what you put out there, but also I think, you know, put things out there and don't be affected by other people's comments. You know what I'm saying? We're apologizing way too much in this world nowadays. I really feel that that's the case. You know. And I think if you say something, you got to stand behind it. Or if you feel like it's a mistake, then you come out and you go, look, this was one time I said this. It doesn't represent who I am. But that doesn't mean you got to stop creating. It really hurts the creative process if you're always watching yourself.
But there's a flip cultural question to what we're talking about, which is eventually this generation will run for office. I mean, they're already members of this generation, at least Stefanik, youngest woman in Congress. There will be more, and we will all have digital footprints. And I think there's a big question about what we as a society decide is off limits. You did that before you were 18. You did that before you were 21. We are going to have to come to terms with the fact that everyone has a childhood, an adolescence, and a past, and decide how much we want that to determine who our future leaders are. I mean, do we want future leaders who have never been on Twitter? If that means that they're the only people vanilla enough to pass
well, it's what Gabriel was saying earlier about how with adults there's a level of BS you got to go through and go, oh yeah, everything's great. But with kids, you go to the truth. So I think that, like you said, like it used to be, oh, did you inhale? No, I tried it, but I didn't inhale. Then Obama goes, well, I inhaled too, and you go, okay, well that's like. So,
and then you're like, you did coke and you're admitting it? Like, what kind of world do we live in?
Yeah.
That now that is an okay thing to say because you're being authentic and honest.
Yeah.
And you have an electorate that's going to allow you to be that honest. Like, you're right. That just wasn't the case 10 years ago.
No.
Not at all. That's why I say with Twitter, you know, it's when you make a statement on a social media platform, it's public record. You're saying, you know, I feel like going to Whole Foods today or whatever casual comment. But then if you make like I watch the news now and I see people referring to congressmen's tweets and different people's so-and-so tweeted this morning, you know, and that's part of the news cycle now. And so it is public record. It is a real thing. And you know, maybe, you know, whatever you tweet under 18 or under 21, who cares? 21, 25 years old, if you're being reckless, you know, you will be held accountable.
Skeletons used to be in the closet, now they're on Twitter.
Yeah, they're all over.
And that's the thing. I think that attitudes are having to adjust when we're confronted with reality, because everybody walking around with a phone basically is a documentarian of life.
Right.
And so you're having to confront things that you, to some extent, pretended were not happening. And the attitudes, I think, are just adjusting to that.
Congressman Castro, I'm sorry, you can jump in.
Oh, no.
So here at this Solving for Why series, and we had a great conversation earlier in this series with Senator Elizabeth Warren, one of our topics is what the government can do, what possible policy implications are for these generational questions. Congressman Castro, you've been looking at immigration reform specifically through the eyes of dreamers.
That's right. You know, this has been a colossal issue in American politics, one that's still unresolved, but we have probably a few million people in our country who fit this category, folks that were brought here through no fault of their own as kids, and are now, some of them very talented individuals who are in this kind of limbo. You know, some of them having graduated from college with engineering degrees or other degrees and can't go to work because of American law. And so that's one of my big hopes is that while I'm in Congress, that we will finally tackle and solve the problem of giving those folks some relief.
Now, one of the questions, Alexis just handed me some questions from y'all. One of the questions here, this is jump ball. Anybody can jump in. Alicia's cheating, she's peeking, but anybody can jump in. How does social media affect perceptions of race?
That's very interesting. You know, there's this thing called Black Twitter, for example, right? and it's just a collection of people. I don't think they have meetings or anything. It's just a group of people who tweet, and they tweet things from the black perspective. Well, from a few black people's perspective, you know, but when Black Twitter kind of makes this rally around certain issues, it becomes, this is what black people think about this, you know, and of course it's not going to always be true. Some things maybe a lot of black people would agree on, but there are things like that, and I think that, you know, the combination of media, hip hop media particularly, and social media, I think in some ways it brings everyone together. It's a very collective kind of culture, and in other ways it's very divisive. It really puts people in these kind of stereotypical categories of how we think and act and do, and what we like and what our preferences are. And so, you know, I think if you're driven by Twitter to make your perceptions on another race of people, then you started from the wrong end anyway.
Yeah, I agree with Gabriel's point that I think that it can be both helpful in communicating with people that are strangers to you and help you get a better understanding, but it can also be very polarizing. And you see it more on Facebook, for example, which is a different platform, more two-directional than Twitter, where you'll have somebody sometimes make a very incendiary comment, and then folks will either react to that with an incendiary comment back, you know, challenging that person or calling them names. But once in a while, you'll see people that disagree in a heated way, get into a genuine conversation on Facebook, and it'll go on, you know, and finally at the end of their conversation, come to at least, if not an understanding, an accommodation of each other. Right. And that's promising. That's a promising thing for social media.
Also, Twitter, I think, has a thing where it's kind of like college. In college, I think a lot of, you find people of your background and you start hanging out with them. And I think that's what interests a lot of people. So if I post something that's more of a generic comment, I'll get some reactions. But if I post something about Iran, or let's say, you know, Netanyahu just talking about the nuclear situation, it feels like the community really gets into it. So I think that's what interests them. So it is kind of like college and finding your group.
Susan Glasser and the great team of Politico magazine, now Garrett Graff, the editor, is out today with this new print issue, Justice in America, that looks at a lot of tough racial questions. And we got a Twitter question at hashtag solving for why, another jump ball question. She is peeking again. Pew recently released a study that says, despite popular belief, millennials are not race blind. Do we expect this to improve with the next generation, those pluralists?
Is the idea to really be blind, or is the idea to treat everyone equally and perceive everyone equally? I mean, I think that it's sort of like when I hear people like say like, "Oh, my kids don't even see race," I'm like, well, what is your, like, what? Like that does, I don't even understand that. Like that doesn't make any sense. The idea is just like whether or not everyone is sort of getting the same opportunities, whether everyone interfaces with law enforcement in the same way, and we're a long way from that point.
And I think that, like, I mean, this just personal, my personal experience, but I'm Iranian, my wife is Indian. Our neighbors are half black, half, I mean, the husband's black, the wife is white. Our kids are best friends. Another couple, black and white, these three all play together. And I don't think they even, they're 6 years old, so they haven't really even started dealing with those issues yet. But I think the more we have these interracial marriages, which are now more and more common, the more the future I'm hopeful for. So I do feel that the answer to that question for me is that I feel that we are headed in the right direction.
All right, a couple more questions from in this room. Alicia, why don't you pick one of these and pick on a panelist? Maz is used to being the victim of anchors like yourself.
How do incidents like Ferguson uniquely affect the outlook of the millennial generation, and what is the impact on race relations? Do you think that that we're going to look back at Ferguson and say like, ooh, that was a tipping point?
I think it depends on what happens next. I don't know. We may or we may not.
What would need to happen for it to be a tipping point?
I think if there was just a general overhaul of how we do, how police engage with communities, how we look at our criminal justice system. I mean, it would take years and a lot of other stuff, but if the ball at least gets rolling as a result of all of these protests and this outcry, then yeah, it would definitely, it could possibly be like another Selma moment. But if we just, you know, a month from now, nothing happens and we go back to our regularly scheduled programming, then no, it'll just be a drop in the bucket. It'll just be another travesty that occurred and we got over it, you know.
Congressman, you're nodding.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. I think, you know, the question now is whether police departments, law enforcement, and politicians do something to change the reality of what's been going on. Not just what happened in Ferguson, but also the Michael Garner video out of New York. And again, all of that is because of the technology that we have today. You know, what happened to Rodney King in the 1990s, that was an example of somebody that happened to have a video camera at that moment. Now, people have their telephones, which have video capabilities. So unless things change, you're going to continue to see instances like that, and we are either going to accept that that happens as a country, or things are going to change.
Now, we'd love to bring you directly into the conversation. Alexis right here has a microphone. If you want a question, just signal, and she will go to you. A question that Kelly suggested to me that I hadn't thought of, and that is there a partisan lens to any of these issues? We invited a number of Republicans to join us here on stage. They didn't exactly rush the stage. Who has a theory about why that might be?
I mean, this is the way that this generation polls at present is overwhelmingly progressive on what have largely been considered social issues, marriage equality, the legalization of marijuana, something like immigration reform. You see numbers in the 60s and 70s in favor of. And I think something that we don't know yet is whether that's because these people are young, or that is actually a generational attitude that will hold forever. I mean, I'll be young for like another 2 years, but I will be a millennial for the rest of my life.
You'll be young for another 20 years.
Thank you.
There's a question.
No. I think there's a challenge for Republicans, which is, you know, how they shape their message for this generation if they allow social issues to take up so much oxygen. Because if they're willing to pursue some of the more libertarian elements of party ideology, they have a huge opening with this generation.
I think criminal justice reform is probably their biggest opening. And you see Rand Paul going after it. I read yesterday about David Koch, I think, one of the Koch brothers, signing on with George Soros and others to try to make this strong push on
yeah, that article is in here, and we interviewed. This is that article, and we interviewed Rand Paul for that. It's a fascinating to have David Koch and Rand Paul on the same page with you and George Soros. Not many issues. We have a question right here, and please just say who you are.
Hi, I'm Sean, and I guess my question is the diversification of Congress. We now have more African Americans, more LGBT folks, more women. How is that shifting the conversation that's happening in public policy making? And what does that also mean for in some ways, the lack of diversification among the staff level, that the members of Congress are getting more diverse, but the staffs aren't always getting as diverse outside of working for African-American members of Congress or female members of Congress?
And then, Alexis, there's a question over here. If you want to tee that one up, go ahead.
Congressman?
Oh, all right. Well, you know, the fact that Congress is looking more and more reflecting America is a good thing. But I think for it to make a real difference on issues like immigration reform or renewing the Voting Rights Act, for example, the parties have to do a better job of working better together. So, for example, you have more Hispanics in Congress than we've ever had in American history, but nothing has moved on immigration reform, for example. So unless the parties are able to come to more working agreements on these big issues, diversity is obviously a good thing, but it won't get us all the way on the issues that that many folks care about. In terms of the staff, I think you're right. I think there's a lot of work to be done there. I saw an article, I don't know if it was in Politico also, but an article a few weeks ago about the DNC and the DCCC and contracting with minority firms, for example. I think at the DCCC it was like 3% or something, right, for the convention in 2012, which strikes a lot of folks as ironic because you have so many African Americans and Hispanics who are part of the Democratic Party and want to be helpful. But yeah, we've got a ways to go to improve those things.
I think we might have a question over here. Just raise your hand if you have a question. Boom, and please just say who you are.
Hi, my name is Izora Dos Santos, and my question is, how can we get millennials motivated to not only vote, but to also run for public office?
Great question. They're like women, you have to ask them. You have to ask them multiple times. Both parties need to step up with the resources to cultivate these candidates and to support them financially, because raising money is a huge barrier to entry, and we need to start doing that at the local level so that people from both parties can come forward with records that they can actually run on. And when we talk about getting young people to vote, like, I think everyone imagines us like kids in backpacks just running around. It's like, no, I'm 31, I just got married, I would like to buy a house. I will not be able to do that in the foreseeable future. I would like to pay local property taxes and send my kids to public schools, and all of those issues that are sort of these fundamental bread and butter American issues are millennial issues, but we never talk to young people like that, right? We never say, I understand that you are involved in a series of system structures and institutions that have handed you a bad bill of goods, right? We don't talk about student loan debt. We act like that's an issue for kids when it's not. I mean, this is a generation that has been preyed on by lenders, and we need to deal with that in a systematic way, not on an individual basis. So if you go to a young person and say, you need to vote not just because it's your civic duty, but because everything in your life goes back to this fundamental right to vote and who represents you in Congress and in the White House, you will see people turn out to vote. But if all you do is talk about Social Security, which, as you said, feels very far off in the distance if you're a young person, that's not going to motivate you in November.
I also think, seeing people like Congressman Castro will inspire young people to go, oh, I should do that, I could do that, as opposed to just seeing older Congress members. So we were just talking about that backstage, which I think that you're inspiring others to get involved as well.
No, I think part of the, oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I said part of the problem also is that when you're young and you want to run for office, my brother was elected at 26 to the San Antonio City Council. I was elected at 28 to the Texas legislature, but there is a sense that people try to put out there that you need to wait your turn, right? Or that your voice matters less because you don't have 30 years of experience or 40 years of experience. You have to break through that. And I was fortunate that I grew up in a town that had a track record of electing young leaders to their city councils, to the state legislature. But I found, looking at different places throughout the country, the tolerance or the acceptance of younger candidates varies depending on the place. Some places are very much a kind of wait your turn kind of place.
There's a question from Twitter, #solving for why. What can the government do to protect the rights of the next generation? Anyone?
What can they do to protect the rights? I mean, I thought that's what they were doing already.
What are they doing now?
Yeah, keep doing what you're doing now, but better. I don't know the answer for that. I do want to say, though, and I mentioned it briefly earlier, but there is something to be said about the hip-hop generation. And I say that because hip-hop is 40 years old. I'm 40 years old. I grew up, I was born in '74. I grew up in what they call the golden era of hip hop. That 85 to like 93 was those were like my golden era years of hip hop culture, and it influences me now. And there are people who are in elected offices and people who are moving into corporate America and that are getting older, who are 40, 45 years old now, who are in positions of power, and they are bound, whether they listen to T.I. now or not, they are still bound kind of in this culture of hip-hop. And I mean, there are people in the audience right now who I share this culture with. We may not be of the same race. We're not of the same, we don't live in the same area, but we're bound through that thing. And so, and it spans, usually a generation is 20 years, right? X or Y, these are like 20-year blocks. Mm-hmm. But I just feel like this hip-hop generation is kind of like a 40-year block of people where you now have parents and teens who listen to the same music. They play video games together. My son just turned 13 yesterday. All he wanted to do when he turned 13 was to get on Instagram because I promised him When you turn 13, you get on Instagram. So, you know, he had his name picked out, he had his photos, and he was ready. I sat with him last night. He's like, this is the name I'm thinking about going with. Like, it was a real situation, you know. And, and at the same time, he and I played, we may play NBA Live together. You know, we share a lot of the same things, even though he's 13 and I'm 40. So there is something to be said about that aspect of it encompassing two generations. The X and Y are kind of all wrapped up into this hip-hop generation.
Congressman Castro, one of the most interesting articles I've ever read about being a member of Congress was a memoir, a diary that you did of your first year that ran in Texas Monthly. It was called Mr. Castro Goes to Washington. And a conversation that you and I had once before as part of our Lessons from Leaders series, you told me one of the most vivid representations I've ever heard of the partisan divide in this Congress. I remember you told me that it starts on the first day when you show up and there's two tables. Tell us about that.
Yeah. Well, you know, at least when I got there, and you do the orientation, as I recall, the December before the January start at the Capitol Hill Hotel right there, right by the Cannon Building and all that. And so I remember getting there. I got off the cab, I had my luggage, and I go to check in, and they have a table for Republicans and a table for Democrats. And I thought right away, we're, you know, and then the rest of the orientation, there were a few events where we were all together, but even the orientation was very much segregated by party. And then, you know, the institution itself is very segregated. Republicans sit on one side, Democrats sit on another, not only on the House floor, but also in the committees. So it's not a body that, in a sense, the way I described it in that Texas Monthly article is that it is a body that's built for fighting, basically, which was different from the Texas legislature I'd come from, where even though I was in the deep minority the whole time, Democrats still chaired some committees, you could still pass some of your legislation, and there was not assigned seating by party.
And so sort of a lame effort to bridge this was that take a date to the State of the Union. Where,
a few years ago.
You would take, So what's a real way that can be bridged? Or what's a way that this actually could change?
Yeah, and I remember in our conversation, I said it depends how much you want to upend or are willing to upend the traditions of the United States Congress, right? Look, there's no reason why you have to keep Republicans and Democrats separate on committees. There's no reason why you couldn't have assigned seating on the House floor. One of the other problems is that everything is so ephemeral. People are coming and going and never really interacting, right? We literally spend most of us, more time on airplanes than we do voting on the House floor. I mean, that's a serious fact. Most people spend more time on airplanes than they do voting on the House floor. So it depends how much you want to get into some of those things. But I'll tell you this, you know, if in this Congress and the next few, things continue at this pace and you have that same gridlock, I think that it's worth taking a look at changing some of those long-held traditions. And I'm not talking about the filibuster and all that. I'm talking about some of these things that I just described to you.
And Congressman Castro, you write in this Texas Monthly article, I did not go to Washington just to stare people down.
Yeah, yeah. Well, there is this sense, you know, there is this palpable tension between the two parties and members of the two parties, and the divide between the two has been so great over the last few years that you feel like everybody is in this weird staring match, you know, where there's angst and folks are not happy with each other. And I don't think that, you know, I don't think anybody came to Congress for that reason, just to be here where nothing's happening, bills aren't passing, we're not coming to agreement on any big issues for the country, and people are just staring each other down, basically.
Maz, if we want to see you at the Warner Theater tomorrow night, how do we do that?
You can go to mazjobrani.com or go to the Warner Theater online, and I think there's a few tickets left. It should be a fun show, so come out and have a laugh. Get out of the snow for a little bit.
And Maz, you're going to have the last word here. I'm going to read you a sentence from your book. This is the first sentence of the acknowledgments. It says, I'd like to begin by thanking the three essential people who made this book possible. Jesus Christ, Elvis Presley, and of course, Justin Bieber.
I did that, and that's the acknowledgments. I'd put that, and then I say, I go, aha, got you, because I always read the only reason I read the acknowledgments is to see if the author knows anybody famous. So I was like, hey, these are three famous people. And then after that, I go on and thank the regular people that I know. But the book is just about my life and traveling around the world, basically told in a funny way. And that's it. And again, I'm not a terrorist, but I've played one on TV. Yeah.
An amicable one. We'd like to thank those of you in live stream land who watched. We'd like to thank Starbucks for making this Solving for Why series possible. We want to thank our friends at SKDK. I want to thank our amazing Politico event staff who pulled this together despite the weather. We appreciate our events colleagues so much. We're grateful to this fantastic panel. And if you haven't gotten a copy, yes, of I'm Not a Terrorist.
But I played one on TV.
Politics and Prose is here by the back bar. I wish you would get one. And Maz is going to stay around to talk with us and sign some books. Thank all of you for coming out in the weather, and thank this incredible panel. Somebody told me backstage, they said, they read the bios and they said, this is the most un-DC event you'll ever go to. So they lived up to it, so thank you.